locked out in a storm. I watched my DIL throw my life into the mud while my son did nothing. She thought I was a helpless pauper, but she didn't know I had $1.2 million and 40 years of experience hunting predators like her. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. I stood on the porch while the sky fell in gray sheets, my fingers fumbling with a key that suddenly felt like a toy. Behind the glass, my daughter-in-law Jessica didn't just look angry, she looked triumphant. She had my life in a cardboard box and a lock she'd swapped out while I was at the grocery store. "Go beg on the streets like the worthless old woman you are," she screamed, her voice cutting through the thunder. "This is my house now." The wood of the door vibrated against my palm. I looked at the brass plate where my key refused to turn. Behind her, in the shadows of the hallway I'd polished every Saturday for 30 years, my son Marcus stood like a ghost. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched as the woman he married threw my life out of a second-story window. My floral dresses hit the mud with a heavy thud. My lace underwear tangled in the rose bushes. Then came the photo albums, the plastic sleeves popping open as they hit the wet grass, spilling black and white memories into the rising puddles. "Marcus," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Marcus, open this door." He looked at the floorboards. Jessica laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that matched the lightning. She slammed the inner door, and the click of the deadbolt felt like a physical strike to my chest. I was 68 years old, soaked to the bone, and officially homeless. What Jessica didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed because I had played the part of the struggling pensioner so well, was that I wasn't just a retired social worker. I was a woman sitting on $1.2 million in investment accounts. And I wasn't just any social worker. I had spent 40 years specializing in elder abuse. I knew the law. I knew the snakes. And I knew exactly how to skin them. I didn't scream again. I didn't beg. I reached into the mud, pulled my wedding album from a puddle, and felt the cold water seep into my marrow. I walked toward the street, the weight of the garbage bag on my shoulder feeling like a cross. I moved into my house in Bronzeville back in 1995. Robert and I paid $85,000 for it. We sweated over the plumbing and painted every baseboard ourselves. When Robert died 10 years ago, he left me with a $400,000 life insurance policy. I didn't buy a new car or a fancy coat. I invested every cent. I watched that money grow, compounding and doubling until it hit 7 figures. But I kept my mouth shut. I'd seen too many children turn into vultures the second they smelled an inheritance. I wanted to know my son loved me for me, not for my portfolio. Marcus had always been soft. He was a gentle boy, but he was a follower. When he brought Jessica home, the red flags didn't just wave, they caught fire. She was 28, a decade younger than him, with acrylic nails and a thirst for a lifestyle she couldn't afford. She called me Mama Dorothy and brought me grocery store carnations, but her eyes were always wandering, measuring the square footage of my living room. 6 months ago, they showed up at my door in the middle of the night. Jessica was a mess of smeared mascara and loud sobs. "We're being evicted," Marcus had said, his voice trembling. "We need $15,000 or we're on the street." I looked at them, my heart warring with my head. I'd authorized a credit card for them for emergencies only, but I hadn't touched my savings for them yet. "We don't want your money," Marcus insisted, looking at his shoes. "Can we just stay here for a few months? Just until I find a new job?" I should have said no. I should have pointed them toward a shelter or a cheap motel. But I looked at my only child and I opened the door. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Within 2 weeks, Jessica was rearranging my furniture. Within a month, she was telling me when I could use my own kitchen. She started small, replacing my curtains with cheap fabric from a discount bin. Then she started questioning my utility usage. "You're using too much hot water, Dorothy," she snapped one morning while I was making tea. "We're the ones paying the bills here." I didn't point out that my bank account was still being auto-debited for the water, the gas, and the electric. I didn't tell her I saw the $30,000 in charges she'd racked up on the emergency card I'd trusted them with. I just watched. I documented. I waited. I sat in the rain on a bus stop bench, clutching my wet bag. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a notification from my home security app. Jessica had just deactivated the porch camera. "She thinks she's erased me," I whispered to the empty street. I stood up, my knees popping, and started walking toward Marlene's house. I didn't look back at the house I owned. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was coming for her. Marlene opened her door before I could even knock. She took one look at my shivering frame and the bag of mud-stained clothes and pulled me into the warmth of her hallway. "Dorothy, what happened?" She was already reaching for a towel. "They locked me out, Marlene." Jessica changed the locks. Marcus just stood there. Marlene's face went from concern to a terrifying, quiet rage. She was a retired nurse, and she'd seen her share of family drama, but this was different. She helped me into a hot shower and made a pot of tea that smelled like bergamot and safety. "We're calling the police, Dorothy," she said, slamming a mug onto the table. "This is illegal. You own that house." "No," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "Not yet. If I call the police now, it's a domestic dispute. They'll tell us to go to civil court. It'll take months. Jessica wants a fight, but she doesn't realize I've been training for this war for 40 years. I pulled my laptop out of my bag. It was the one thing I'd kept in the car. I logged into my investment portal. The balance stared back at me. $1.2 million. Jessica thought she was stealing a bungalow. She didn't realize she was trying to rob a bank. "I need a private investigator," I told Marlene. "I need Gerald." Gerald was an old contact from my social work days. He was the kind of man who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who manufactured the needle. I called him at 10 p.m. "Dorothy." "It's late for a social call," his gravelly voice answered. "I'm not calling as a friend, Gerald. I need a full workup on Jessica Marie Washington, maiden name Brennan. I want every debt, every previous marriage, and every scrap of paper she's ever signed." "Give me 48 hours, he said. The next morning, I didn't go to my church volunteer shift. I went to see Richard, my attorney. He'd been handling my estate since Robert died. When I walked into his office, he looked at my bruised ego and the damp hem of my coat. "She tried to get me to sign a quitclaim deed last week," I told him. "She told me it was for estate planning, to help Marcus avoid probate." Richard leaned back, his brow furrowed. "Did you sign it?" I laughed. "I'm a social worker, Richard. I read the fine print. It wasn't adding Marcus to the title. It was a full transfer to her name, effective immediately." I told her no. 2 days later, I'm in the rain. "That's attempted fraud," Richard said. "But without your signature, she's just a squatter." "She thinks I have dementia," I said. "She told the neighbors I'm confused. She's going to try to have me declared incompetent so she can take over as my guardian." Richard tapped a pen against his desk. "We need to move fast. If she files for guardianship, she can freeze your assets." I nodded. I already called Tamika at Adult Protective Services. "I'm going in for a voluntary competency evaluation this afternoon. I want a paper trail that says I'm sharper than a razor blade. I spent 3 hours with Tamika. She was a girl I'd mentored a decade ago. She ran me through the tests, the memory recalls, the financial logic puzzles. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Miss Dorothy, You're in the 99th percentile. You're more lucid than I am. Write it down, I said. Notarize it. I have a feeling Jessica is about to tell a very different story. I went back to Marlene's and opened my laptop. I had a hidden camera in the living room, disguised as a digital photo frame. I'd installed it months ago when the first red flags appeared. I held my breath as I logged into the feed. The house was full of people. Jessica was wearing my favorite silk robe, holding a glass of wine that looked suspiciously like my expensive vintage Merlot. She was laughing with two women I didn't recognize. The old bat finally snapped, Jessica was saying, her voice echoing through my speakers. She started screaming at the walls, throwing her own clothes out the window. Marcus and I had to lock the doors for our own safety. We're looking into memory care facilities tomorrow. The women shook their heads in faux sympathy. One of them touched the arm of my sofa. It's a beautiful house, Jess. You'll have so much more room once she's settled. Oh, I'm not staying here, Jessica said, her eyes gleaming. I've already listed it. We're going to take the cash and move to Scottsdale. Marcus doesn't know yet, but he'll do what I tell him. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. She wasn't just stealing my home. She was selling it out from under my son. I looked at the screen. Marcus was in the background, sitting on the stairs with his head in his hands. He looked broken, but he didn't say a word. He was an accessory to his own mother's destruction. I closed the laptop and looked at Marlene. She's listing the house, I said. Marlene gasped. How? She doesn't have the deed. She's a predator, Marlene. She'll forge it. And that's exactly what I'm waiting for. Gerald called me the following afternoon. He sounded impressed, which was a rare thing for a man who spent his life looking at the worst of humanity. Dorothy, your daughter-in-law is a professional, he said. Her real name is Jessica Marie Brennan. She's 30, not 28, and you aren't her first victim. I gripped the phone. Tell me, 5 years ago in Ohio, she married a guy named Thomas. He had a grandmother, a sweet woman with a house and a small pension. Jessica convinced Thomas the old woman was losing her mind. She got a power of attorney, sold the house, and moved the grandmother into a state-run facility where she died 6 months later. Jessica vanished with $180,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. Did she get caught? The police investigated, but Thomas wouldn't testify against her. He was too ashamed. She's got $50,000 in credit card debt right now, Dorothy. She's being sued by 3 different banks. She's desperate. She's also dangerous, I said. I hung up and checked the real estate listings. There it was, my bungalow, my life, listed for $280,000. The description said, owner motivated, quick sale possible. She'd used a forged quitclaim deed to list it. I knew because I called the listing agent, pretending to be a buyer. Is the owner available for a viewing? I asked, my voice disguised with a slight tremor. The agent was perky. The owner's daughter-in-law, Jessica, is handling everything. Her mother-in-law has moved into assisted living and needs the funds for her care. It's a sad situation, but the house is a gem. I thanked her and hung up. My blood was boiling. She was using my supposed illness as a selling point. I spent the next 2 days in a war room at Richard's office. We weren't just filing an injunction. We were setting a trap. I reported my credit card stolen. I reported the identity theft. And then I did something that felt like pulling out my own heart. I filed a report against Marcus. He's your son, Dorothy, Richard said softly. He's an adult, I replied. He watched her throw me out in a storm. He's either a victim or a predator, and the law needs to decide which. On Thursday morning, the real estate listing changed to sale pending. Jessica had found a cash buyer, an investment group that specialized in quick closes. They were scheduled to sign the papers at 2 p.m. on Friday. I spent Thursday night watching the hidden camera. Jessica was packing my things into trash bags. Not to keep them, but to clear the house for the new owners. She threw Robert's old Navy uniform into a pile of junk. She smashed a ceramic vase Marcus had made me in the 3rd grade. She was erasing every trace of the woman who had lived there for 3 decades. Marcus walked into the room, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. "Jess, maybe we should call Mom, just to see where she is." "She's fine, Marcus," Jessica snapped. "She's probably at Marlene's, playing the martyr. We need this money. Do you want to go back to that motel? Because that's where we're going if this sale doesn't go through." Marcus slumped into a chair. "I just didn't think it would be like this." "It's exactly how it needs to be," she said, her voice dropping to a low, hissed warning. "You stay quiet. You sign the papers I tell you to sign, and we get our fresh start. Don't ruin this for us." I turned off the monitor. I couldn't watch him anymore. My son was a coward, and in the world of predators, a coward is just a silent partner. Friday morning was clear and cold. I dressed in my best suit, the one I used to wear to court when I was testifying for the kids in foster care. I met Richard and 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit at the title company's office. Detective Williams looked at the file I'd handed him. "You've done my job for me, Miss Washington. I was a social worker for 40 years, Detective. I know how to build a case." We sat in a back room, hidden from the main lobby. At 1:45 p.m., Jessica and Marcus walked in. Jessica looked radiant in a new designer suit, likely bought with my stolen credit card. Marcus looked like he was heading to his own execution. They were led into a glass-walled conference room. The buyers were already there, 2 men in sharp suits with checkbooks ready. I watched through the glass. Jessica was smiling, charming the room, her hand resting on a stack of forged documents. She picked up a pen, ready to sign away my life. That's when I walked in. The silence in the conference room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Jessica's pen stayed frozen an inch above the paper. Her face went from a triumphant glow to a sickly pale gray in 3 seconds flat. "Dorothy?" Marcus gasped, his chair screeching as he stood up. I didn't look at him. I looked at Jessica. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice calm and projected, the way I used to speak in courtrooms. "But there seems to be a slight problem with the ownership of this property." The real estate investors looked confused. "Is this the mother-in-law?" one of them asked. "We were told she was in a facility." I smiled at him. "I'm quite certain I'm not. And I'm quite certain I haven't signed over my house to anyone." Jessica found her voice, though it was an octave higher than usual. "She's confused. I told you, she has episodes. Dorothy, honey, we talked about this. You signed the papers last month." I pulled a folder from my bag and laid it on the table. "This is a certified competency evaluation from Adult Protective Services, completed 3 days ago. It states I am of sound mind and fully capable of managing my own affairs." I then pulled out a second document. "And this is a forensic analysis of the signature on that quitclaim deed you filed." "It's a forgery, Jessica. A very poor one." Detective Williams stepped into the room, followed by his partner. "Jessica Marie Brennan, you are under arrest for identity theft, forgery, and elder financial exploitation." Marcus began to shake. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know she forged anything." Jessica didn't cry. She didn't beg. She turned on him like a cornered animal. "Shut up, Marcus. You knew we needed the money. You're just as guilty as I am." The detectives moved in. They handcuffed Jessica right there in that fancy office. She screamed, a raw, ugly sound that echoed off the glass. She called me a bitter old woman. She said she hoped I died alone in that empty house. I stood there, watching her being led away. I felt a strange sense of emptiness. There was no joy in this, just the cold reality of justice. Marcus was left standing in the room, his wrist bare but his face destroyed. The detectives looked at him, then at me. "We'll need him for questioning," Detective Williams said. "Whether he's charged depends on how much he knew." Marcus looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Mom, please." I looked at the sun I'd raised. I looked at the man who had watched me stand in the rain. "You should go with the officers, Marcus," I said quietly. I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk. The sun was bright, but I felt a chill that wouldn't leave my bones. I had my house back. I had my life back, but I had lost my son. I went back to the bungalow that evening. The locks were changed again, this time by a professional I'd hired. I walked through the rooms. The furniture was rearranged. My things were in trash bags in the hallway. The house smelled of Jessica's perfume and expensive wine. I went to the kitchen and saw the ceramic vase Marcus had made me. It was in pieces on the floor. I knelt down and started picking up the shards. One by one, I put them into a small pile. The phone rang. It was Marlene. "Is it over?" she asked. "The arrest is over," I said, "but the work is just beginning." The next 3 months were a blur of depositions, bank statements, and legal filings. Jessica's past caught up with her like a tidal wave. Once the Chicago police started digging, the authorities in Ohio reopened their case. The evidence of her previous scams was overwhelming. She tried to take a plea deal, but the prosecutor, encouraged by a very persistent Richard, refused. They wanted a trial. They wanted to make an example of her. Marcus was eventually cleared of criminal charges. They determined he was too weak, too easily manipulated to be the mastermind. But in the eyes of the community, he was finished. He lost his job. His friends stopped calling. He was the man who helped a predator hunt his own mother. He came to my door 2 months after the arrest. He looked thin, his clothes wrinkled. "Mom, can I come in?" he asked. I stood in the doorway. I hadn't let him in since the night of the storm. "I'm staying at a shelter," he said, his voice breaking. "I have nothing. Jessica took every cent we had and spent it before the arrest. I need a place to sleep." I looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to be afraid of the dark. I saw the teenager I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college. And then I saw the man who stood behind a locked door while his mother was soaked to the bone. "No," I said. Marcus blinked, as if he hadn't heard me. "What?" "I spent 40 years protecting people from predators, Marcus. And the hardest lesson I ever learned was that sometimes the person who enables the predator is just as dangerous. You didn't just let her do it. You watched. You stayed silent for your own comfort. Mom, I'm your son, and I am your mother. But this house is no longer your home. You chose your side that night in the rain. Now you have to live with that choice." I closed the door. I didn't lock it with a dramatic click. I just shut it and walked into the kitchen. I sat at the table and finished my tea. Jessica's trial lasted a week. I was the star witness. I sat on that stand and told the jury everything. I showed them the bank statements. I showed them the hidden camera footage of her laughing in my silk robe. I showed them the mud-stained photo albums. When the verdict came back, it was guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in state prison, with a recommendation for consecutive time for the Ohio charges. As she was being let out, she looked at me one last time. She didn't look sorry. She just looked hateful. I went home and did something I'd been planning since the night at Marlene's. I sold the bungalow. I sold it for $300,000, $20,000 more than Jessica had tried to get for it. I used that money, along with a portion of my investment accounts, to start the Washington Elder Justice Fund. We provide free legal services and private investigators for seniors who are being exploited by their families. I moved into a beautiful condo with a view of the lake. It has 24-hour security and a concierge who knows my name. I'm 69 years old now, and I'm busier than I've ever been. I got a letter from Marcus last week. He's working as a janitor at a hospital. He's in therapy. He asked if he could see me for coffee. I haven't answered him yet. Maybe someday I will. But for now, I enjoy the quiet of my new home. I enjoy the fact that my keys always turn in the lock. And I enjoy the knowledge that while some people think the elderly are worthless, some of us know exactly how to fight back. I'm Dorothy Ann Washington. I'm a mother, a social worker, and a millionaire. And I am nobody's victim. The transition from my old life to the high-rise was like moving from a battlefield to a sanctuary. I stood on my balcony, the wind off Lake Michigan whipping my hair, and thought about the $1.2 million that had been my secret for a decade. That money was no longer just a safety net. It was a weapon for those who had none. My office for the Elder Justice Fund was a glass-walled suite downtown, and every morning I walked past the receptionist with a purpose that made my joints feel 20 years younger. The first case we took on felt like a ghost of my own past. A woman named Hattie had been moved into a basement while her granddaughter sold her jewelry. As I sat with Hattie, looking at her bruised wrists and the way she flinched when the door opened, I didn't see a stranger. I saw myself on that porch in the pouring rain. I felt the same cold shock, the same tremor in my hands. We didn't just file paperwork for Hattie. We moved with the speed of a strike team. I sent Gerald to track the jewelry to a pawn shop 3 blocks from the granddaughter's apartment. I had our staff lawyers file for an emergency freeze on the granddaughter's bank accounts. When we walked into that basement with the police, the look on the girl's face was a carbon copy of the one Jessica wore at the title company. "That's for Hattie," I whispered as the handcuffs clicked. But the success of the fund couldn't drown out the silence from my own family. Marcus had stopped sending letters, but he started sending photos. Pictures of him at the hospital where he worked, his face gaunt under the fluorescent lights. Pictures of the small drab room he was renting. He wasn't asking for money anymore. He was asking for a witness to his penance. I looked at a photo of him holding a mop, his eyes hollow. My social worker brain told me he was building a new foundation, brick by painful brick. But my mother's heart remembered him standing in the hallway, watching his wife throw my photo albums into the mud. The albums were ruined. The ink bled dry by the storm. Some things, once soaked through, never truly dry. One afternoon, a man walked into my office without an appointment. He was tall, mid-30s, with a weary face that suggested he had carried a heavy weight for a very long time. "My name is Thomas Brennan," he said, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. I stood up, my pulse spiking against my ribs. Thomas, the husband from Ohio, the man who had lost his grandmother to Jessica's greed. "I heard about the trial in Chicago," Thomas said, his voice steady but thin. "I heard you did what I couldn't do. You stopped her." I sat back down, gesturing for him to do the same. "It took 40 years of training and $1 million I didn't tell anyone I had, Thomas. Most people don't have those tools." He looked at his hands. "My grandmother died in a room that smelled like bleach and loneliness. I let it happen because I believed the lies. I believed Jessica when she said the old woman was dangerous. I wanted to thank you for making sure she can't do it again." We talked for 2 hours. He told me about the forged power of attorney and the way Jessica had isolated him from every friend he had. It was the same playbook, executed with clinical precision. When he left, I felt a new level of resolve. Jessica wasn't just a thief, she was a serial killer of spirits. The phone on my desk buzzed. It was the prison. Jessica Brennan was requesting a visitor. I stared at the blinking light. She was in a cell, her wages garnished for life, her reputation a blackened husk. She had nothing left but her voice. I picked up the receiver and gave my answer. The visitor's room at the correctional center was a symphony of gray and institutional green. I sat behind the reinforced glass, waiting. When Jessica walked in, the designer suits and acrylic nails were gone. She wore a shapeless orange jumpsuit, her blonde highlights grown out to a dull, muddy brown. She looked like exactly what she was, a predator without a jungle. She picked up the phone, her eyes searching mine for a flicker of the Mama Dorothy she used to manipulate. "You look well, Dorothy," she said, her voice crackling through the receiver. "I guess my house sold for a lot of money." "It wasn't your house, Jessica," I said, my voice flat. "It was the house I paid off while you were still in elementary school." She let out a dry, rattling laugh. "You always were so self-righteous. You and your little fund. You think you're a saint, but you're just a lonely old woman with a bank account." I leaned in closer to the glass. "I am a woman who wakes up every morning in a home where the locks work. I am a woman who helps people like Thomas Brennan find their peace. You are a woman who will spend the next 6 years eating off a plastic tray." Jessica's face twisted, the mask of the victim slipping to reveal the venom underneath. "You think you won? Marcus is a shell. He's a janitor, Dorothy. He's nothing. I took him from you, and even if I'm in here, you'll never have him back the way he was." I felt a sharp sensory jolt, like a cold needle in my heart. She was right about one thing. The Marcus I knew was gone, but she was wrong about the rest. "He's becoming a man, Jessica. For the first time in his life, he's standing on his own feet, without a predator telling him where to walk." I hung up the phone while she was still screaming. I didn't look back as the heavy steel doors buzzed open to let me out. The following month, the Elder Justice Fund hit a major milestone. We had recovered over $2 million in stolen assets for seniors across the city. To celebrate, we held a small gala at a hotel downtown. I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of the people we had helped. Hattie was there, wearing her recovered pearls, sitting next to her new honest caregiver. As I spoke about the importance of vigilance and the strength of the elderly, I saw a figure in the back of the room. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, standing by the service entrance. It was Marcus. He didn't come forward. He didn't try to get a plate of food. He just stood there, listening to his mother tell the world how to survive people like him and his wife. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the distance between us, and then he disappeared into the night. I went home that evening and sat in the dark, watching the lights of the city. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I saw the work you're doing tonight. I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm starting a new certification program for medical billing. I want to earn my way back. I'll be at the office on Monday to help with the filing. No pay, just the work." I didn't reply. Not yet. I looked at the shards of the ceramic vase I had moved to my new mantel. I had glued them back together, but the cracks were still visible, a roadmap of the break. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. My deadline for the new budget was approaching, but for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about numbers. I was thinking about the rain. Monday morning arrived with a biting Chicago wind. I walked into the office and found Marcus already there. He was sitting in a small cubicle in the records room, surrounded by stacks of paper that needed to be digitized. He looked up, his face cautious. "I'm just here for the filing," he said, his voice low. I nodded and walked past him to my office. I didn't invite him for coffee. I didn't ask how he was. I let the work be the bridge. Throughout the day, I watched him on the security feed. He didn't take a lunch break. He didn't check his phone. He worked with a grim intensity, his hands moving through the files of people who had been betrayed just like I had. He was reading the stories of the victims. He was seeing the wreckage people like Jessica left behind. By 5 p.m., the office was emptying out. I walked into the records room. Marcus was closing the last drawer. "You did good work today," I said. He stood up, his shoulders slumped. "Some of these cases, Mom, they're horrific. The sons, the daughters. How do they live with themselves?" I looked him straight in the eye. "They tell themselves lies, Marcus. They tell themselves the victim doesn't need the money, or that they're doing it for their own good. They convince themselves that a mother's love is a blank check for their own greed." Marcus looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't have any excuses left. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. Nothing covers it." "No, it doesn't," I said, "but the work helps." We walked out of the building together. As we reached the sidewalk, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. "Dorothy Washington?" one of them asked. "I am." "We're with the state's attorney's office. We need to talk to you about a new development in the Brennan case." My pulse spiked again. "Is there an appeal?" "No," the man said, glancing at Marcus. "It's about the investors, the ones who tried to buy your house. They've been linked to a larger money laundering ring. Jessica wasn't just selling your house to any buyer. She was working with a syndicate that targets elderly homeowners across the Midwest." The world narrowed to a target. Jessica wasn't just a lone predator. She was a scout for a pack. "We found your name on a list in their lead office." The officer continued. "You weren't the only one in Bronzeville. There are 12 other properties they were circling. We need your help to map out how they approached you." I looked at Marcus. He was pale, his eyes wide. He had been a pawn in something even bigger than he realized. "I'll help," I said, "but I don't work for free. I want every one of those 12 families brought under the protection of the fund." The officer nodded. "That's why we're here." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about my revenge anymore. This was about a total takedown. I turned to Marcus. "Get your coat," I said. "You're going to help me go through the witness statements. You know the way she talks. You know the hooks she uses." Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned back toward the building, his pace decisive. Justice finally had an address, and we were about to burn the syndicate to the ground. The final months of the year were a whirlwind of depositions and late-night strategy sessions. With Marcus's help, we identified the specific psychological hooks the syndicate used to isolate seniors, the exact phrases Jessica had whispered in my ear about protection and avoiding probate. We didn't just stop the 12 sales in Bronzeville. We triggered a federal investigation that dismantled the entire investment group. Jessica's sentence was extended by another 4 years after she was found to be a key informant for the syndicate. She would be in her late 40s by the time she smelled fresh air again, and with a felony record that would make her a pariah for life. As for the Elder Justice Fund, we grew from a small office to a citywide institution. We had a staff of 20 now, and our success rate for asset recovery was the highest in the state. On a clear, crisp December evening, I stood in my new condo, preparing for a quiet dinner. The lake was a deep, frozen blue, and the city lights twinkled like diamonds on velvet. I looked at the ceramic vase on the mantel. The cracks were still there, but the gold leaf I'd used to fill them made the piece stronger, more beautiful in its brokenness. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the concierge. I checked the monitor and saw Marcus. He was holding a small box and a single white rose. I opened the door. "I brought you something," he said, his voice no longer trembling. "It's not much, just something for the new place." I stepped aside and let him in. He walked to the window, looking out at the view. "I passed my certification, Mom. I have a real job now. I'm working in the billing department at the university hospital. I'm paying back the restitution to the fund every month." "I know," I said. "I've been tracking the deposits." He turned to me, the white rose held out like a peace treaty. "I know I can never be the son you had before that night, but I want to be the man you can be proud of now." I took the rose and placed it in the vase. The white petals stood out against the cracked ceramic and the gold. "You're getting there, Marcus," I said softly. We sat down to dinner. We didn't talk about the rain. We didn't talk about Jessica. We talked about the future, the lives we were saving, and the work that still needed to be done. I had started the year as a worthless old woman, standing in a storm. I ended it as the director of a legacy that would protect thousands of others from the same fate. Jessica had wanted to leave me homeless and alone. Instead, she had given me a mission that made my life more purposeful than it had ever been. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I walked to the window and looked out at the city I had spent 40 years serving. The locks were secure, the accounts were full, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt like a home. I exhaled like surf. Victory, hard earned. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.